Daryl Morey says Doc Rivers is staying. James Harden, it remains to be seen. These guys are now kind of like subtweeting and bitching at each other on Twitter.
Whoa.
Just fun thing that we like to do on Twitter. Ben Simmons is now back like in the mix, liking tweets and all that kind of stuff. So where do you go from here if you're the Philadelphia 76ers?
Well, first of all, I didn't know we could use the B word on these streams.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome into Monkey Knife Fight's NBA Conference Final Preview Show. I'm Dan Watkins. Joining me from Rotowire.com, Nick Whalen. Nick, sorry, I guess apologies. I don't know what to say, how to start this off here. But what's the vibe in Wisconsin right now after that Game 7 loss?
I got to say the vibe isn't as bad as you think. I think when you win the title the year before, you can't be super upset, when you don't go back to the finals the next year. I watched Game 6 and Game 7 with some friends, and there was a lot of negativity being thrown around, but we kept having to remind ourselves we're without Chris Middleton, and it felt like that narrative kind of faded away throughout the series, partially because Chris Middleton, I think, is such a mild-mannered guy that he's just easy to forget, I guess, in a lot of ways. And obviously Giannis and Drew Holiday command so many storylines, but for Milwaukee to make it to a Game 7, basically play Boston even through halftime of Game 7 without Chris Middleton, I'm not a big moral victories guy, but you can't be too upset about it. You went the entire series without your second best player, and I'm sure you guys watched every game. It was blatantly obvious that Milwaukee needed a shot creator and needed, Chris Middleton's spot up shooting. The 3-point margin, I think, was plus 53 in favor of Boston for the series. So overall, obviously it's disappointing. You would have liked to see a more competitive finish to Game 7, but I would say, look, if you take Jaylen Brown away from Boston and you put Chris Middleton back on the Milwaukee Bucks healthy, I don't know if I see Boston pushing this to a 7-game series. So again, I'm not a big moral victories guy, but I think all things considered, without Middleton, you have to feel pretty good about how Milwaukee played.
So still feeling good about the future. Keep this team intact as is. Nothing drastic this offseason.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot you could do, right? If you could flip Chris Middleton into Luka Doncic, yeah, you go ahead and do that. But the Bucks are basically locked in with Giannis. They're locked in with Middleton. They're locked in with Holiday. Brook Lopez, I think his contract expires after next season. So maybe you start to explore some sort of succession plan there just because he's getting older and that contract becomes easier to move. But we saw how great the defense was with Brook Lopez back at the end of the season. So I think they basically run it back. I think you hopefully shuffle the role players a little bit. I think that's where we're going to see changes. The George Hill, Wes Matthews, Pat Connaughton minutes. Maybe you bring some of those guys back. Maybe you go to the free agent market. You go to the kind of the lower end trade market. And I think Milwaukee needs to load up on shooting. I think that was the glaring issue. Even if Middleton was healthy, I think they were going to get outshot in the series from three. I think they really missed even like a Kyle Korver type, a guy who was on the team a couple of years ago. It's just somebody who can come in, and even if he's only playing 9 minutes a game, just hunting shots, because the Bucks have a decent supporting cast, but they don't have a single knockdown 3-point shooter on this team outside of Chris Middleton. And obviously when you take him away, you see what happens. It was a historically bad shooting performance yesterday, but at the same time, that's kind of how those guys shoot. You have a lot of up and down shooters on this team. So it's not like you had a bunch of Klay Thompsons going 0 for 6 from 3. So I think addressing the shooting, getting Giannis more drive and kick options, that's the number one thing. But for me, as long as everybody's healthy, as long as Giannis is on this team, Milwaukee is going to be near the top of the Eastern Conference for the foreseeable future.
Yep. They just need some consistency from deep, like you just said.
Yep.
I almost wondered, do you try to build this team from here on out, kind of like the 08 to 2011 Orlando Magic? Just run the Giannis Dwight Howard in the middle and surround him with 4.
Yeah.
From here on out.
You know what? I kind of like that idea. And obviously you have some really good secondary options in Middleton and Holiday, but look, that style tends to be criticized, but we're seeing it work right now with Dallas. Dallas has a significantly worse roster, I think, than Milwaukee. And just having the ball in Doncic's hands and surrounding him with guys who can space the floor has done wonders for that team. Dallas had no business beating the Phoenix Suns. And there's a million reasons that I'm sure are going to come out for why they ended up doing it. But that's not a great supporting cast around Luka Doncic, but all the pieces fit and all the pieces make sense. The example I always bring up too is think of all the great teams that LeBron has been on for the last decade. He never won more games in his career than when he was on those terrible Cleveland teams. And it was just him having the ball every single time, passing it and kicking to open shooters. You know, so you don't necessarily need, you know, other guys who can, you know, create off the dribble all that much. When Giannis is kind of doing everything, you need to surround him with guys who can space the floor. And Milwaukee just did not have enough guys like that in this series. So I'm not saying you want to make the roster worse, you know, trade Middleton, trade Holiday, but you just need guys that the defense is going to respect, because as we saw yesterday, every time Giannis was touching the ball, Horford's right there. Jaylen Brown is sinking. Grant Williams is coming over to double or triple team. You know, you just can't let teams get away with that.
My last question I have for you about the Bucks before we move on here. Did they make a mistake the last week of the season, ducking the Nets and letting the Celtics get that 2 seed?
You know, in retrospect, I guess they did. You know, I think we all thought that Brooklyn was going to put up more of a fight, but based on what we saw from Boston in round one, it's pretty reasonable to think that Milwaukee with Chris Middleton probably would have done the same thing to Brooklyn, right? So I don't know that they were in the wrong. I think everybody at the time agreed that you didn't really want to play the Nets, and you could play the whole like psychological game of like, you know, did you anger the basketball gods by ducking this matchup? Was there some sort of karma afoot here? Maybe there was. But, you know, I think the bigger thing is the Nets just turned out to be paper tigers. I think the Bucks were in the right at the time. I was glad they dodged the Nets. Like, why not take a free first round win against the Chicago Bulls when we all thought, no, Nets Celtics was going to be a 7-game slugfest, you know? So to me, it was more just like a complete no-show, disappointing showing by the Nets that now makes it look like a bad move by Milwaukee.
Yeah, and who would have thought the Bulls would put up a bigger fight in the first round?
Right, exactly.
Moving on, the other team that was eliminated in the Eastern Conference this past round, the Philadelphia 76ers. Where do we go from here with them? Daryl Morey says Doc Rivers is staying. James Harden, it remains to be seen. These guys are now kind of like subtweeting and bitching at each other on Twitter.
Whoa.
Just fun thing that we like to do on Twitter. Ben Simmons is now back like in the mix, liking tweets and all that kind of stuff. So where do you go from here if you're the Philadelphia 76ers?
Well, first of all, I didn't know we could use the B word on these streams. So maybe Brian will have to bleep that when we put it on YouTube. But I mean, on paper, the roster looks great, right? You have a rising young star in Tyrese Maxey. You have a future Hall of Famer in James Harden. You have one of the 5 best players in the league in Embiid. You have a fairly solid, you know, supporting cast on this team. Maybe you could beef it up a little bit. You have a great 4th option in Tobias Harris. Like, everything looks good, but then you see this team play, and, you know, it's a lot of the same issues that we've seen not only from the Sixers team in previous iterations, but from James Harden and all the teams that he's been on in the past. I mean, I don't know at what point we get where the NBA collectively says, if James Harden is on your team, you are not getting to the NBA Finals. I know it happened all the way back in 2012 when he was more of a role player with OKC, but it almost feels like he might be nearing that Russell Westbrook zone where, you know, you're like, yeah, well, you know, maybe if it's our last resort, we'll bring him onto our team just because of his past success. But look, I like James Harden. I didn't come on here to pile on him, but like, how many times do we have to see this happen before teams kind of stop, I should say, talking themselves into, you know, we'll be the team that finally gets James Harden to break through. I mean, this was yet another, this is what, 10, 15 times that he's had games like he had to finish out this series where, and I think we talked about it on the last stream, like, it's okay if you're fine with James Harden going like 10 for 25 in a game 6 or a game 7. You know, if he doesn't have a shot, he doesn't have a shot. So be it. But you're not okay with him taking 2 field goal attempts in the second half of a game when you absolutely need him. Like, it's become completely bizarre at this point.
Yeah, I don't think you can give him a max deal. I just, you know, I don't think anyone, or the super max or whatever, the 5-year deal or whatever. I don't think Philly should do that, but you never know what the Sixers, what they're going to do though.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you have a choice, right? I mean, if you don't give it to him, somebody's going to do it. So it's either you traded all that for a half-year rental of James Harden. That was a catastrophic failure. And then you let him walk. I mean, they're backed into a corner here.
I would go right to Embiid and find out what he wants. Make him your franchise, the face of your franchise, and go from there. What he wants to do, whether he wants Harden back or not, and kind of go from there. Give him that power. And then on the Western Conference side, I think we'll kind of skip over Memphis here. I think everybody agrees they're on the up and up. You know, young team kind of coming. But as for the Phoenix Suns, Chris Paul eliminated once again, kind of the similar thing as James Harden, once again, just not going to get that ring this year. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, Pat Beverly just drove to the First Take Studios this Monday morning and just laid on CP3. Jeremy Lin said something last night about how Paul deserves a title, deserves a ring. And Beverly just immediately goes after Jeremy Lin, saying, why does he deserve anything? And then there was another great quote.
Jeremy Lin is involved in this? Like,
yeah, Jeremy
what are we
Lin
doing?
Involved. Lin Sanity is involved in this as well.
Yeah.
We got Pat Beverly mentions how the night before playing Steph Curry and the Warriors, he's in bed, lights out by 8 o'clock, tells his girl, do not text him. But if he's playing Chris Paul and in the Suns or whoever CP3 is on at the time, he's out past 10 o'clock, not even worried the next day. So what do you make of Chris Paul? Where does he go from here? And any thoughts on the Pat Beverly note on the side note on this?
Well, for one, I love this era of the NBA where a player could just go on national TV and like openly criticize another player. Like I love that clip on First Take this morning. I'm all for that. And look, Chris Paul does deserve a ring, but he also deserves equal amounts of slander for the ways that he's come up short over the years, right? I mean, I was texting some friends last night. We were talking about CP3 and I'm like, you just wait. Like I guarantee you in the next 5 hours, we're going to get a tweet that Chris Paul is going to say he was injured the entire time. And like 25 minutes later, Mark Spears tweets that Chris Paul's limping around and you know, apparently had a left quad injury this entire time. Like, look, you can't fault a guy for getting injured, but this is like the 5th time that a series ended. And then Chris Paul says, yeah, oh yeah, by the way, I actually played bad because I was hurt. Like, which is it, man? So it's getting a little bit frustrating in that regard to see Chris Paul like play so well early in this series, in the first round series against New Orleans, and then these last 4 games just completely fall off a cliff. You know, if you're injured, say you're injured and adjust accordingly. You know, don't just kind of wait until the end result and then try to use that as an excuse if things go wrong. So in some ways, you know, I think Pat Beverly is right, but I also think we have to keep in mind that Chris Paul is, you know, one of the probably 25 to 30 at worst best players in NBA history. I mean, it's just crazy unfortunate how these postseasons continue to end. I'm still in shock with how that Game 7 went and just the fact that Phoenix is no longer in these playoffs. I was telling anybody who would listen that we were heading toward a Bucks-Suns rematch in the NBA Finals. And at least Milwaukee has the excuse that Chris Middleton was hurt, but I just can't believe the way that Phoenix wilted.
Yeah, Chris Paul is very, very rapidly entering the Dan Marino of the NBA territory.
Yeah, Dan Marino, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley. I mean, doesn't it feel like this was maybe not the last shot, but probably the best shot for this Suns team to get it done? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with Ayton. They were up 2-0 in the finals last year, and they were such a big favorite coming into the playoffs. I mean, it's astounding to lose to this Dallas team that, yeah, maybe has the best player in the series in Luka, but other than that, I mean, this Phoenix roster is so much better.
Oh yeah, top to bottom, without a doubt. And let's kind of dive into these Western Conference final, or these 2 conference final matchups. Let's start with the East. Let's talk Celtics-Heat here for a minute. The big question, I think, going into this series is, can the Celtics keep up this barrage of 3-pointers that they've just been launching? This is starting this second round here. They had 2 games with more than 23 pointers, including 22 in Game 7 on Sunday. I'm also having flashbacks to this, to the 2020 in the bubble with the Heat and Bam Adebayo doing whatever he wanted to the Celtics in that series. The Celtics just not being able to match Miami's shooters either. But this year, I feel like the Celtics have the edge when it comes to shooting and kind of go from there. So how do you feel? What's your gut feeling here going into this series, Nick?
I wish I could tell you I had like a real inclination of how this is going to play out, but I have no idea. I mean, it's interesting that Miami is favored to win Game 1, and that game is in Miami. They have the rest advantage. They're 1.5-point favorites. But then you go and look at the series prices, and Boston's favored to win the series. You know, they're -180 to win the series. Miami's +150. So that tells me that the odds makers view this as a really even fight. You know, we're going to see, I think, what Miami ends up getting from Kyle Lowry in this series. That might ultimately be the swing piece. It sounds like he's probably not going to play in Game 1 tomorrow. You know, if he doesn't play at all in this series, or he's limited throughout the series, maybe that pushes the advantage toward Boston. You know, to your question about the 3-pointers, I don't think Boston can rely on that in the way that it could against Milwaukee. The Bucks, you know, as was the case last year, they got away with it, but they just don't adjust. You know, I mean, I don't know how many times you have to leave Al Horford, Grant Williams, Derek White, Jason Tatum wide open. I mean, you had guys going under screens when Jason Tatum is the primary ball handler. And Milwaukee, as they have, you know, since Bud took over, they're happy to live and die by the 3. I mean, they led the league in opponent 3-point attempts by a huge margin this season. But Miami was also in the top 5 in that category. So the looks are going to be there. The question is, can Miami close out better? You know, can they force at least some sort of a contest? Because especially yesterday in that Game 7, it's like yeah, maybe Boston shot the three a little unsustainably, but how many of those looks were wide open? It felt like 80-90% of them.
Yo, without a doubt. I mean, Grant Williams, the self-proclaimed Batman, as he was saying, he wants the bat signal put on top of the TD Garden there whenever they need him. Jason Tatum even laughing post game, saying, "Yeah, don't get used to him being able to jack up 25 shots or whatever he got to throw up on Sunday." But if the Celtics are going to get that kind of contribution from their bench, I like them in this series, and I like them to kind of wrap up fairly quickly.
That's the thing, and Milwaukee, one, you're missing Chris Middleton, and two, I mean, that was Grant Williams coming into this series. You would have said he's Boston's fifth most important player at best, fifth or sixth. Sure. I mean, getting that type of series out of that caliber of player is almost impossible to overcome, right? I mean, think of the gap between Bobby Portis and Grant Williams in this series, or Al Horford and Brook Lopez. Derek White versus Wes Matthews or versus Grayson Allen. I mean, the Celtics role players played amazingly for the bulk of that series against Milwaukee. If they could keep that up, I think Boston probably deserves to be the slight favorite. We saw Miami's role players really struggle for a lot of that last series against Philadelphia. It's going to be really interesting, though. I mean, the Jimmy Butler, Jason Tatum matchup is going to be fantastic. Bam Adebayo, I'm sure we'll spend some time on Tatum, maybe spend some time on Brown. It's going to be an awesome series. Like, even though I'm upset Milwaukee's out of it, I can't wait to watch this one.
Yeah, I was listening to like national radio driving home Sunday night after the Celtics game, and they were kind of talking about how there's like a lack of buzz on these two matchups. But I think on both sides you have some pretty significant firepower star-wise with Luka, Steph, and all the Warriors on the West, and then Butler, Tatum, those guys in the East. And then I saw this too, that since 2005, I think Boston and Miami have the most conference finals appearances out of anybody else in the East. So these are two pretty significant franchises here that are in this matchup. Which injury, you just kind of mentioned Kyle Lowry here a few minutes ago. Which injury to you is going to be more significant, Kyle Lowry or Rob Williams?
And I think it's got to be Lowry, right? Just because we saw Boston basically win this series against Milwaukee without Robert Williams. I know he was okay in the games that he played, but he never really looked like himself, at least the guy that was like at his peak midway through the regular season. So, I mean, Boston has already proven that I think they're a more dangerous offensive team with Robert Williams not available, right? I think in some ways that was maybe a little bit of a blessing because they don't really need Robert Williams on defense against Milwaukee. And I know I felt like he hit like a few of those like weird fadeaway, like 7-foot jumpers that he's always taking from the baseline. But I think you could argue that it kind of took the decision out of Ime Udoka's hands and, allowed them to have more spacing out there. Like Grant Williams playing 35 minutes a game in this series wasn't really a bad thing because he can space the floor and Robert Williams can't. So I think like anything you get from Williams, you could view as a bonus. We'll see how that knee holds up, but Boston's already proven they can win without him. Miami, I guess, has proven it can win without Lowry, but to me, the gap from Lowry to, Gabe Vincent or current day Victor Oladipo, that gap is bigger than the gap from Robert Williams to the Horford/Grant Williams combination.
All right, very good. We do have the contests up for Boston Miami game 1 on MKF. So let's kind of run through these props a little bit here, Nick. Jason Tatum, his more or less on MKF is 28.5. He's averaging 28.8 in this postseason. So game 1, how do you like Tatum?
Man, Tatum in game 1, let's see. I mean, he went over this number in game 1 against Brooklyn. He went well under this number in game 1 against Milwaukee, but it feels like he started to heat up toward the end of this series. I think he's kind of back to having that mojo that he had at the end of the regular season. I'm going to go more here. I know he only had 23 in yesterday's game 7, but that was partially because everybody else was red hot. He was looking to pass, wasn't really looking for a shot all that much, but 46 in game 6, 34 the game before that, 30 the game before that. I think he's locked in. I think we're going to see a good game from Jason Tatum in game 1.
I like the more here as well. I think if that game was a little closer towards the end of the third quarter, we would have saw Tatum push close to 30 in game 7. So I think that's just all going to be about game flow. And I don't see Miami getting blown out at home in game 1, especially with 4 nights of rest going into this one. Then you have Jimmy Butler on the other side. 25.5 is his more or less. He's averaging over 28 per game in the playoffs. This number kind of caught me off guard a little bit here, Nick, but is this just tipping our hat to the Celtics defense? Why this number's down that far?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, we've seen Butler have some really high highs so far. I mean, think back to that 45-point game against Atlanta in round 1, but we've also seen him, have some he had a 15-point game in game 1 against Philly, had 22 the game after that, had 23 in game 5 against Philly. So there's, we've kind of seen the best of both worlds, I guess, from Jimmy Butler. But I'm going to go more here. I think what we have seen from him is that even in the games in the last round that Miami lost, like he was still really aggressive. That game where they only scored 79 points, he took 22 shots and had 33 points. Like he was approaching half of their point total. So he's shown that even if things aren't going well, like if you think Boston's going to win game one, Jimmy Butler is still going to, no matter what, if they're up 10 or down 10, he's still going to be super aggressive. He's going to get to the line a ton. He's shown a little more willingness to take threes in the playoffs. I mean, he took 5+ threes 3 times in that last series, something he almost never does. So I think we continue to see that aggressive version of Jimmy Butler, especially with Kyle Lowry likely out of this game one.
Yeah, I'm going to go more here as well, just because just looking at how Miami's played this postseason, the drop off between Jimmy Butler's scoring output and then their next best player, which is I think Bam at like 15 a game. He's almost averaging twice as much as Bam as their number 2. So I think just the volume there is going to be there for Butler. So I'm going more. Jaylen Brown, 23.5 more or less on MKF. He's averaging 22.5 so far this postseason. Nick, you like Tatum to have a decent night. What do you feel about Brown?
I think we're due for a less here. So I'll go less on Jaylen Brown. I could see this where, maybe Miami says, look, Tatum is so good. He's going to get his 30, we'll kind of live with that, but we have to limit Jaylen Brown. And I think Brown picking it up as that series went along against Milwaukee was a huge difference maker. I think the bench and the Horford, Grant Williams production was what ultimately, tipped the scales in favor of Boston. But think of how bad Jaylen Brown was in that game one and how great he was in game two, how awesome he was in game three, even in a loss. He just gained more and more confidence as the series went along. So I think Miami recognizes that. I think the Heat want to limit Jaylen Brown, and I think they hold him to less on this number for game one.
And last one here, Bam Adebayo, 8.5 rebounds on MKF. I think he's averaging close to 8 this postseason. I like the more here, Nick, just because I think the Celtics have shown that they can give up offensive rebounds like nobody's business. And I think Bam's going to have quite a few here in game one. How do you feel about Adebayo?
Yeah, I know they gave up a decent amount of offensive boards, in that series against Milwaukee. Brook Lopez, I think, averaged like almost 3 offensive boards per game, but I really felt like Boston rebounded well overall. I think it felt like they always had the bodies at least under the basket, and I know there were some tips that kind of didn't go their way.
Maybe it's just the end of game 5, and that's just replayed.
Yeah, exactly.
But
exactly. Yeah, I honestly think Bam goes less here. I think he goes less. I mean, he only had 1 double-digit rebound game in the last round against Philly. That was game 1. Boston has a lot of size. Maybe you don't have quite an Embiid size guy on that roster, but between Robert Williams, Grant Williams, Al Horford, I mean, even Tatum is 6'8", 6'9". Jaylen Brown's a big guy. I think they all combine to keep Adebayo off the glass, relatively speaking. So I'm going to go less on that number for game one.
All right, very good. Let's move on here and let's talk about the Western Conference Finals. Golden State taking on Dallas Wednesday night. This one gets going. The Warriors pretty heavily favored in this one at -260 to win the series. Dallas is at +210. But Nick, are you giving any shot that Luka goes full Dirk 2011 here and just carries Dallas into the finals?
It's definitely possible, right? I mean, I would have picked Phoenix over Golden State. So, transitive property says that if Dallas can beat Phoenix, then I should think that Dallas could beat Golden State. And, the Warriors, it's been really hit or miss for them, especially in round 2 against Memphis. I mean, a couple just complete no-show games and a couple games where the offense looked completely unstoppable. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see which version of Stephen Curry shows up. He's kind of back to struggling in the playoffs, as has been his MO for much of his career. Jordan Poole been really up and down. Klay Thompson been really up and down. I think if both teams play, as well as they possibly can, then Golden State probably wins the series in like 5 games. But we've seen that this Golden State team just doesn't quite have that next level consistency. I think that we saw during, the pre-Durant era, and certainly during the Durant era, where they could be down down by 20 at the half, and you would just know that a run was coming. Like at some point, this game is going to be close. And I feel like that mystique has worn off a little bit with the Warriors. So, I mean, Dallas has every right to be confident. I think these teams are going to play very similar styles. Golden State maybe moves the ball around a little more, but we're going to see a lot of 3-point shooting. We're going to see a lot of drive and kick. And it's going to come down to, I think, whichever team can ultimately shoot the 3 better. And, I don't love Dallas's role players on paper, but I mean, Spencer Dinwiddie just showed up and scored 30 points in an elimination game 7 yesterday. So we need to respect Dallas. I'm still picking Golden State to win, but I think we have to expect the Mavs to push this to at least 6 games.
I'm glad you brought up Spencer Dinwiddie because I saw this stat that Luka and Dinwiddie became the first set of teammates to drop 30 apiece in a game 7 in the NBA playoffs since Shaq and Kobe in 2004.
Wow.
So quite the stat there for those two.
Yeah.
So put some respect on Spencer Dinwiddie's name.
Who would you, which duo do you think is better, Dinwiddie and Doncic or Shaq and Kobe?
Well, I was wondering, I was thinking of this, before the show. I was like, we got Magic, Kareem, Michael, Scotty, Kobe, Shaq and Kobe, and now Luka Dinwiddie. I mean, they're all right there. That's the Mount Rushmore of duos in NBA history. Right.
Yeah.
There.
Whalen, Watkins. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Just, watch us on the court, which is, I feel like we might move a little better on the court than Luka does sometimes. Because watching him is just such a joy.
It's amazing. It's entrancing. Like he never changes speeds. He's just constantly, he's always at like just a 50%, like even, and then somehow he's blowing by like much more athletic players. Like it is astonishing to watch. He's probably my favorite player to watch right now.
Just watching him just just nonchalantly go by a screen and like someone coming up to try to set a pick or something and how he just rolls right off. It's mesmerizing. I can't get enough of it. So anyways, awesome. Let's one more question on the Warriors for you though. Is this it? We talked about how this might be it for Chris Paul's last run here at a ring. Is this it for the Warriors? Are they done after this, or do we see them hang on?
I don't think so. No, not at all. I mean, I think we're going to have to see, if this slump by his standards by Stephen Curry is just who he is now, which is still like an extremely dangerous offensive player who's like a borderline MVP candidate. But, Steph shooting 44% from the field and 38% from three is a lot different than him shooting 50% from the field and 45% from three at his absolute peak. So if he's moved into like maybe a different phase of his career where he's still like a no doubter all-star, but is not like, head and shoulders above the rest of the league in terms of shooting, that does change things a little bit for the Warriors. But I mean, now you have the infusion of Jordan Poole, assuming they can find a way to keep him around. It's going to cost him. You still have the James Wiseman chip who, maybe you get something from Wiseman next year. Maybe you trade him and bring in some more pieces. Like, I don't think this is it for the Warriors by any means. If anything, Klay Thompson should look better next season. We're seeing guys like LeBron James, Chris Paul. I can't believe I'm saying this, but even like Dwight Howard, Carmelo Anthony, like these guys are playing into their late 30s and are still pretty effective. I mean, in Paul and LeBron's case, still very, very effective. So I don't really think there's any reason to think that this is like Steph Curry's last run by any means. I think he at least has a couple very, very good years, if not elite years, left in him.
All right, very good. The lines I don't think yet are up yet on MKF at the time of recording this.
Right.
But we'll guess them here. Let's just run through a couple of them. Luka's averaging 31.5 on the dot, so let's put his more or less at 31.5 for game 1 for Luka.
Going more. I would love to see a series where Luka just breaks the NBA record for usage rate every single game. I mean, I think the better comparison, you mentioned 2011 Dirk Mavs, obviously that's apt, but I mean, this reminds me of, I forget what year was it, 06, 07 LeBron, that first finals run with the Cavs where he scored like 25 straight against Detroit. And, they end up getting just housed by San Antonio in the finals. But, just one of those series where it was basically 1-on-5 and the 1 prevailed over the 5. And it kind of feels like Luka is on the verge of pulling something like that off. And, he's a great passer. He's a great rebounder. He's happy to distribute, but it starts with the scoring and it starts with the shooting for Luka. And I don't think he's going to come out and have like a feel out game in game 1. I think he's going to come out firing. He had 45 in game 1 against Phoenix. So I think we see something similar and he goes more.
Yeah. And I think he had a really good regular season against Golden State too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
as well. So I like the more for Luka too. Until that number gets up around like 35.5, I think I'm going to hit the more just about on Doncic. On the other side, Steph Curry, he's averaging 26.9 points per game in these playoffs. So let's put his more or less at 26.5. How do you feel about Steph here, game 1?
Steph, game 1, I could see having a little more of a feel out effort. Game 1 against Denver, and to be fair, he played 22 minutes and came off the bench, had 16 points. Game 1 against Memphis had 24 points in 37 minutes. The big difference between Steph and Doncic is that Steph has other scoring options. And, in Jordan Poole, he has like a rising star. And in Klay Thompson, he has a guy who is capable of hitting 10 threes on any given night. And Luka doesn't really have that. So I'm a lot more confident in Luka's floor as a scorer, just because by default, he's going to take like 25 plus shots. Whereas with Curry, there are certain nights where if Poole has it going, if Thompson has it going, if Draymond has it going, if Otto Porter has it going, there are nights where Curry could kind of put it on cruise control. So I'll go more on Doncic, less on Curry.
All right, I'll do one more. Let's do Klay Thompson. He's averaging 20.4 points per game in the playoffs. Let's put his number at 20.5 for Klay in game one.
Ooh. Let's go more. I hate this narrative that's developing around Klay, like, oh, he doesn't look the same. And maybe that's true on the defensive end, but I feel like every time I watch him, he looks pretty much the same. I mean, that closeout game against Memphis, he was 8 of 14 from three. I think he is still the most dangerous catch and shoot guy in the league. I would even put him above Curry in that regard. I think Curry is obviously so much better off the dribble, so much better creating his own shot, but there is nobody in the league I would rather have taking a catch and shoot open three than Klay Thompson. It's such a weapon to have available to the Warriors. So I think he carries over that momentum from game 6 against Memphis, has a good game 1 and goes more on that number.
All right, very good. Let's make some predictions here. Before the playoffs started, you predicted a rematch between Phoenix and Milwaukee. Let's give you a chance at a redemption pick, Nick. Who you got going to the finals?
Man, I'm gonna go Boston, and I'm gonna go Golden State. I think we're gonna see Warriors in 7, and we are going to see Boston in 6 over the Miami Heat.
All right. My pick before the playoffs started was Celtics-Warriors, so I'm sticking with it. I'm going to go against it. I think both series get wrapped up in 6 games. That's my pick.
Okay. I love it.
All right. Very good. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button here on our YouTube page. Nick, where can they follow you for old time's sake?
You can follow me on Twitter at WHA1EN. As you can see, I creatively and uniquely switched out the L for the number 1. So you can find me there.
Very good. And you can follow me at Dan Watkins Radio. Thanks again, guys. Enjoy the conference finals.